I'll be doing some closing remarks at the very end and leave you with some resources. So without further ado, we'd like to turn the presentation over to Councilman Joe Dietz.
Great. Thank you so much, John. And welcome everyone to this multi-faith forum, Connecting Our Faith with Collective Climate Action. I'm so excited to be here to exchange ideas and information with you. For the unavoidable fact is we really do need each other, one another, to meet this challenge. You know, governments are reflections of the community they serve. And this city of Bainbridge Island has made climate action one of its main priorities. Late last year, City Council unanimously passed an ambitious climate action plan called the CAP. It's a comprehensive roadmap encompassing specific actions for reducing our greenhouse gases and increasing our resilience as the climate changes. It was created by local climate experts led by Mike Cox, whom you'll be hearing from right after me. In addition to legislation, we carved out of a very tight budget enough to create a new full-time position at the city, a climate mitigation and adaptation officer. This individual, who we hope to have on board in the second quarter of this year, will provide the needed leadership within the city in directing and coordinating the CAP. The city has also set aside $500,000 to meet any immediate needs. So we're being serious. So why am I doing this? I believe that a moral obligation exists to build our climate resilience, to do so so we can ensure that future generations can live life as we all presently recognize it. Thank you again for coming. I look forward to hearing your thoughts and answering any questions.
Great. And our questions will be, like I mentioned before, at the end. And now we have the honor of hearing from Mike Cox.
Okay. Thank you, John and Joe, especially Joe. Thank you for your leadership on this issue in helping us get this through the Climate Action Plan. I also want to recognize Deb Rudnick and Gary Lagerlof for also on the committee. As I think Joe said, November approved the Climate Action Plan, which is a great thing. I'm going to talk about that. But before we go into the specifics, I wanted to kind of reflect also on what John Joe have said, that this issue of climate change is a global issue. And we know that the world is interconnected and what we do has impacts on others around the world. So we know that. But what we also know is that for climate change, the people least responsible for climate change will suffer the most from its consequences. What do I mean by that? What I mean by that is over time, right now, 90% plus of the greenhouse gases that's causing the warming in the world came from industrialized countries, from the United States, from Europe, from Russia, from China, from Japan. And we put this stuff in the atmosphere, but the people who are least able to adapt to the changes that are occurring now and are going to accelerate are those people in poor countries. And I saw it. I worked in Africa for 5 years. I saw it. I saw the farmers, a lot of them right on the edge. And if they have a drought, if they have extreme weather, there's no safety net. So for me, this becomes not just a scientific issue, but a moral and an ethical and an equity issue. And I think it also has become that for faith across the world. You're not going to obviously read this, but what I found heartening is that every faith tradition I looked at talked about climate change and talked about the need to take collective action now. And a lot of it was because we need to take action, of course, for our lives, but also for those that don't have the means to adapt to the changing climate. But of course, that's the global level. We live in the global level, or the globe obviously, but we're here on Bainbridge Island. And you've all heard the old saying, think globally, act locally. And So what I want to do is talk for the next few minutes is about what we are doing, and we, meaning the collective, all of us are going to need to do in order to collectively move ahead and do our part to reduce the threats from climate change. And I think as somebody said, the Climate Change Advisory Committee was started in 2017. And it was started because there was a handful of people on the island who went to the city council and said, we need to do something. And so with their leadership, they established a committee, 9 volunteers. We meet monthly. And in 2009, the city council said, we want a climate action plan. And so we developed what we call a roadmap to how we do really 3 big things. First of all, how we reduce our greenhouse gas emissions. And obviously that's important because that's what's causing the warming. Second, prepare our city businesses and citizens for the climate impacts. We need to prepare, we need to get ready now because we're seeing those impacts and into the future. And finally, we have to engage our community to find solutions. So reduce, prepare, engage. And just in the context, because this is important, we did something called a greenhouse gas emissions inventory. What it found for our community was that over 50% electricity from Puget Sound Energy. Right now, approximately 55% of changes of the fuel they use to generate that electricity is coal and natural gas. Those fuels produce a lot of greenhouse gases that then, of course, we buy and then we use in our houses. So that's a big chunk. The other big chunk is transportation. And that includes the cars we drive, it includes the ferries, it includes the airplanes that we fly on. So those 2 chunks take up almost 85% of our greenhouse gases. And we have other ones. We have waste, we have propane, we have something called hydrofluorocarbons. But those are the 2 big ones. So keep that in mind. Also in the development of the Climate Action Plan, we did a lot of outreach. We did a survey, almost 450 respondents. And then we had 2 public meetings, over 150 people attended, provided us input in what they thought we should do. And Shazam, we come up with a plan with 3 overarching goals. The big one on mitigation is by 2045, we want to reduce our island's greenhouse gases by 90% compared to 2014. And I'm going to tell you, that is going to be a challenge. And why that's going to be a challenge is right here in 2014, we did a survey. 2018, we did it again, 9% growth in our greenhouse gas emissions. If you follow that trajectory out, this top line, we're out here. Where we need to be to meet our goals is down here. The delta between that is quite large. And so how are we going to get there? How are we going to do that? Well, what we did is we grouped the Climate Action Plan into 6 focus areas: energy, buildings, transportation, natural environment, waste, and community engagement. Not going to talk about all those because we don't have time. I'm just going to highlight a few. But to start, and I'm not going to go in detail because Gary and Marcy will talk about this, but a first step for all of us is to figure out what's our carbon footprint. What activities do we do that generates greenhouse gases? And we're talking the community and our city, which we've done as part of the Climate Action Plan. But we like businesses and congregations and households to do that, to try to figure out what they're doing that are contributing to greenhouse gases. The second big thing is we need to do 2 things on our energy supply, the electricity side. 1, green our supply. 2, reduce our demand. Sounds easy. And we can do this on different scales. 1, our community. We need to work with Puget Sound Energy to try to figure out how we can get energy here that's renewable, that's green. That's what we want. And they are going in that direction. But to be honest, I think we want to push them a little more. And when I say we, that means all of us. We need to make clear to PSE that we want renewable energy, not in 20 years, not in 30 years. We want it now. And that's on all of us. Second, our city. You happen to see Joe Dietz. This is his project, a community solar project that he shepherded on our city hall. Another activity, the city activities, and this is an example of what you can do. Our neighborhoods, this is the Grow neighborhood in our community. What are those things on top? Solar panels. It can be done in our community, the neighborhoods. Our congregations, this is in Minnesota, it's not around here, but congregations around the country are taking it upon themselves to put solar on their buildings, to do energy efficiency, to do things that are both increasing the supply, local generation, reducing demand, and finally, our homes. We all can do something with our homes in terms of insulation, windows. We can do that. Second big part, as you remember, transportation. We need to create a carbon-free transportation. How do we do that? Well, fortunately, we have a sustainable transportation task force on the island. They're working to create networks for biking and walking. So for all of it, we can do that safely, and we could do it for all ages and abilities. That is really important to get people safely from one point to another. The most common theme why people don't ride their bikes around, one, the hills, I'm sure some people would say, but two is safety. We got to improve that. The second part, improve public transportation. We have a leader at Kitsap Transit, John Clausen, who really wants to go forward with trying to green the transportation. They have one electric bus, they're buying another one. We really need to figure out how we can improve and get more people on it. Third, create electric infrastructure. We're, as you know, walking around or driving around the island, they're building many multifamily homes. Many of those don't have garages. So how are people going to charge their cars if they get an electric car? We need to put in code that that is required at buildings in order for people to have that luxury. Electric ferries. Fortunately, in the next couple of years, both of our big ferries are going to be electric hybrids, which is an amazing thing the state is doing, and really applaud them for that. A couple of things we can do as individuals. When you're thinking of buying a new car, as we all do, these are 15, 20-year investments, at least for us. We buy a car about every 20 years. Think about an electric car. Think about that and look more on the long term if you have that luxury, because over time, the electric car is definitely the way to go from a financial standpoint. And the range of these cars now are 250 to 300 miles. Finally, what we can do as individuals, fly less. Our carbon footprint from flying is enormous. So think about next time you think, do I need to visit Aunt Mabel for the 6th time this year? Maybe not. Maybe you could drive or maybe you could talk to her on Skype. The third big area, the change that we must have is equitable and affordable. And what do I mean by that? One, we need to make sure that people have access to information. And we're working with the city now to make that happen. And then we need to work with everybody to make sure that happens. Equity lens. We're working with Race Equity Advisory Committee to come up with a way that we can look through projects, city projects, private projects, where you can have what we call an equity lens. So you can evaluate what is this project going to do for underserved populations. So we're working hard on that. A green energy fund. For those people who may not have the resources, we need to create a fund that can assist homeowners in insulating and putting new windows in and buying a heat pump so we can reduce the demand, that demand side. And finally, emergency preparedness. We all know the last few summers with the smoke have been really bad. Those are from wildfires. And if the scientists are right, it's going to increase. So we need to figure out how we can ensure that our citizens here are safe from those cases where they might not have access to, like some of us. Our resources, Joe already highlighted it, hiring a climate officer. We thought this was really important and thank the city for doing this because, as you know, in any organization, you have a new project. What do? Pile it on Sam, pile it on Mary. Well, it doesn't get done because Sam and Mary already have way too much to do. So hiring a climate officer is critical to how we're going to move forward. And then the funding that Joe talked about, the $500,000, is really going to go a long ways. And finally, our choices. What can we do with our choices? Well, we can think about going to a plant-based diet. It's amazing the reductions in your carbon footprint that can come by eating meat less and food waste that goes along with it. So that's one thing, plant-based diet. The second thing, do we really need all that stuff? Do we really need that fourth pair of skis? Well, I only need 3, or this third bike. Do we really need that? Because as we know, the more consumer things we get, the bigger footprint. And finally, social responsibility investing. Think about when you're investing, whether it's your congregation or individual, what you might be able to do in socially in responsible investing. And think about, do I want to be investing in fossil fuels, or do I want to go for more solar energy or wind energy? Second, our collaborations. Some call the Interfaith Power and Light, an incredibly powerful organization nationally that brings faith organizations together to work together on climate change. Interfaith Council here, we can get the Interfaith Council working, I hope, on this issue of climate change across. Also, local groups, join local groups, Zero Waste, Citizens Climate Lobby, Climate Action Bainbridge. They're local organizations that are working on climate change. And our engagement. We need to engage in the community. We need to engage the city council that Joe is on, and they're very receptive. They're very receptive. And finally, elections have consequences. We all know that. And I know as faith-based organizations, that's a touchy one, but as individuals, really think about, and we've seen that in Washington State last year, the year before, when the state changed composition, a lot of climate change legislation was adopted. So next steps. What can we do? What can we do as congregations and communities and individuals? Well, we can support the implementation of the Climate Action Plan. We can do what we've already talked about, and Marcy and Gary will talk, determine and take actions to reduce carbon footprint. We can work together, seek funding. We can involve parks, schools, community groups, and businesses. Just today, had a meeting with the parks, and they want to move forward once pandemic is over on creating a climate action plan for the parks, and the schools have said the same thing. But also we need to celebrate our successes occasionally, to pat ourselves on the back and say, we're doing okay. And finally, I'll leave on this. We all have the reasons why we do this. And what I don't want is at the end of my time, that these are my 2 sons. I don't want my sons or my nieces and nephews or whoever. I do not want them to say, what were you thinking? You knew this was a problem and you did nothing. I don't want that. What I want is I want my kids to say, thank you, Dad. Thank you, Uncle. Thank you for at least trying to make this place a better place for us. So that's it. So thank you again for listening. And I'm really looking forward to the next 2 sections. I'm going to learn a lot. So thank you.
Wonderful job, Michael. Wonderful job, Joe. Now we have the pleasure of hearing from Gary and Marcy Lagerlof about their adventure in carbon footprint.
I guess I'll start off. I'm Peter Lagerlof, and I think some of you recognize me. I've often given talks about climate science around Bainbridge Island for the last, I don't know, close to 2 decades in various forms. And so I come at this discussion tonight both as a scientist and a person of faith. I'm a member of Grace Episcopal Church, and I'm the kind of person that doesn't see science and faith as a dichotomy, but I work in my own mind to integrate those ideas together. But it's part of my motivation for wanting to take action on climate. I've been a member of the Climate Change Advisory Group since 2017. And as Mike explained, we've done a lot of work putting together this climate action plan. I just have a few brief points I want to make, and then I'm going to turn the discussion over to Marcy. The first point is that that pie chart that Mike showed at the beginning of his talk, the largest slice of the pie was the amount of electricity, the carbon emissions from the electricity that we consume from Puget Sound Energy. And it was over half of our total carbon budget. Part of that belongs to municipal operations, and part of it belongs to households and the rest of the community. So the part that belongs to municipal operations is about 16 or 17% of the total. And what's left over is about 37% of the total. And that is accounted for by you and I and the stuff we do from day to day. And then 37% of that is residential electricity, basically what comes through your PSE meter. Another 30% of the total is travel. A large chunk of it is just our own personally owned vehicles driving around the island. A large chunk of it is air travel, and a smaller portion of it is ferry travel. If you take these two numbers together, our electricity consumption and our travel, we come up with 67% of our greenhouse gas inventory as a community. That's 2/3 of our carbon emissions. And these are the two largest slices of the pie, and these are the things that we can do something about personally. What we really want to talk about tonight is setting up a program to do our own carbon inventory on a household by household basis. And it's something that we can do. We can track our usage. We can monitor and see what we're doing. We can make choices and decide what we want to do differently to reduce our consumption. And so that's the action that we can take. And it's something that really involves all of us as a community because it's such a large proportion of our greenhouse gas emissions. So I'm going to turn it over to Marcy to talk a little bit about a specific greenhouse gas inventory calculator that we could all use.
Thank you. I've been associated with a group at Grace Church called Earth and Spirit for a lot of years. And in that time, we've heard a lot of climate speakers. We have done book study groups. We read Laudato Si and discussed it and thought about it. We've seen films. And a congregate came to me recently and she said, I have been longing for concrete action. And the carbon footprint, using a carbon footprint calculator and just taking a close look at your own household is a way to bring a problem that can seem overwhelmingly immense to all of us, climate change, bringing it down to the personal level and saying, what is within my power to do? So along with supporting our city council in our city and the actions that they're going to be taking, there are things each of us can do. And my pitch to you tonight is going to be both a pitch to you personally and as leaders of congregations, because I think a lot of these things are made more fun when they're done in a small group where you can exchange stories of what you learn, you can collaborate together and figure out solutions, and you can encourage each other. No shaming, no contest, literally how do we learn together and inspire each other? So we gathered a very small beta testing group of some people from Cedars and some people from Grace Church. And we used a climate calculator that was developed locally. There's lots of climate footprint calculators out there. We used something developed in Port Townsend called Taming Bigfoot. And we used it because we actually got to work with the developer and to tune it for Bainbridge Island. Specifically, we were able to incorporate a carbon emissions factor specific to Puget Sound Energy, which is higher than what they're using in other municipalities. Because, as already been explained, a lot of their energy comes from fossil fuels. This carbon calculator also includes ferry travel. And if you look at a lot of national carbon calculators like the Berkeley one, there's no accounting for ferry travel. So we selected this one to try out. No surprise, obviously, even in a year when most of us weren't traveling much, home electrical usage was the biggie. Travel would be if we were allowed to travel. But what I found, or what the group of us found, is that we did pay more attention. We paid attention to, okay, how might I operate my heat pump in my home differently? How might I decide whether to have a fire in the fireplace and turn my heat off? How do we trade these various things? And so people were able to sit down and look at choices and trade-offs that they might make. For ourselves, Gary and I have grandchildren in Germany. We haven't seen them this year. Once we do, our carbon footprint will go way up. But we will buy offsets. I'm now convinced we will do the best we can. We'll buy carbon offsets. There was another unexpected benefit from this work, not in those big categories. And a lot of the people that volunteered, by the way, for this beta test are already people with solar panels on their roofs. They're the people, they're the go-getters anyway. But I found that I started paying attention to everything. I was shocked that eating beef was 4 times the carbon footprint of eating fish. I was surprised to find out that buying $40, a $40 item of clothing, which isn't hard to do in the boutique shops on Bainbridge, is more than 40 pounds of carbon emissions, because most clothing that we buy today, the fabric is dyed in one country in Europe, and then the fabric is transported to China, and the garment is made and it's shipped back to us. So there's an amazing carbon footprint with that. The other eye-opener to me was in this carbon footprint, you weigh your trash every week. And this is things aside from recycling and composting. Gary and I have about 2 pounds of trash. But when I look in that trash bag, it's all the kind of stiff plastic wrapping that comes around various products,
Or
food
cellophane
products,
wrapping, yeah.
cellophane, things that can't be recycled. And that struck me more than before doing the footprint, not because it's a massive part of the footprint, but because I realized that that plastic going into my trash is going to be around a lot longer than I am. And so I'm motivated to do something different, even though it may not change my carbon footprint dramatically that way. So what all of us found testing this carbon calculator was that it raised our mindfulness and it raised our individual ownership of the problem, that we are part of the problem and that we can join together and do something about it. So what Gary and I are doing is issuing to the rest of you an invitation. We would love to join with other faith communities and work on a carbon footprint calculator together. Do this as small groups within individual communities and then collaborate with each other to see how we're doing. Not a contest, literally a way of learning together and inspiring each other. So if you're interested in that, John, I didn't ask you about this, but I'll take the liberty of saying contact John Kidd, since his email is out there on the flyer. And he'll route it to me, or we'll somehow get it together. But we would love to do that as a community exercise. It's a piece we can do to support the overall climate action plan. Thanks.
Oh, wonderful job. Thanks very much. So now we have the honor of turning to our faith communities for their views, ideas, and actions. And we'll begin with Reverend Stephen Crippen.
Hi, my name is Stephen, and I work for Marcy and Gary, and other people on here. They buy my groceries. And I'm excited to talk with them further about ways that Grace can continue to play its part in this ministry, which is how I look at it. I look at creation care as a ministry or as part of our identity as a faith community. And so Marcy would do a much better job, and Gary would do a much better job than I would to tell you all the ways that Grace has been powerful on this issue in the past, and she just outlined a lot of that. In a more general sense, our property it includes trails and woods and a big maple tree that is our focal point for our worship, and it is maple, right? Okay. And I just know that it's a big tree that rises above the back of our church, and Grace really has lived into this property over the last year, because as we've gone into lockdown and separation, we've noticed that the area that we live on and pray on is much more like a park now, and much more open and interactive with our neighbors. And there's a way in which our land has kind of started to flourish in the absence of people, while our building stands quietly. And so creation and a love of creation and an appreciation of who we are as created beings is palpable here at Grace. And it's also it's also part and parcel of our faith tradition. And so we read the scriptures and we notice that Jesus prays and interacts with the natural world. And so he's in the wilderness, or he's on the sea, or he's by the seashore, or he's climbing a mountain to go into solitude to pray. And this isn't just scenery. It's not just setting the stage. Something's being said here about our faith and about our identity, that prayer is something that happens in the midst of created life. At the crucifixion, the whole creation seems to be responding to what's happening to Jesus. And then in the resurrection, the garden flourishes. And again, this is not just a light show or just an entertaining way to add color to the story. The whole creation is caught up in the rhythms and the patterns that we identify as a faith community. And so our task and our goal and our hope and our mission is to proclaim climate justice, not just because we have a general sense that that's the right thing to do, but because that's who we are. I just heard today from Jane Goodall, who, as many of you must know, is an activist for decades now for all created life and for the restoration of natural habitats. And she was saying that we do not inherit the earth from our ancestors, we borrow it from our children. And she talks about how even the chimpanzees that she studied in the 60s and 70s, they would, as she watched their behavior, she noticed that they would do and communicate things to one another, that the longer she watched it and the more she studied it, the more she saw that they were interacting with their natural environment with even a sense of awe. And so she told a story of how one of the chimpanzees would go to this cascading waterfall and sort of fearfully and cautiously move around it, and then move up it, and then interact with it in ways that didn't make sense at first. And as she watched and as she listened, she saw this creature just looking up in awe at this cascading water that was always coming and always going and always here. And so she began to gain an appreciation that all created life is responding to and depending on and rejoicing in all created life. And so we, as Christians and as Episcopal Christians and as people of faith on Bainbridge Island, who also serve people off the island, we take up all of these things quite naturally and ordinarily as part of our prayer life and as part of our mission and ministry in this place. Thank you.
Wonderful job. Thank you, Stephen. If anyone feels expressing appreciation, you can go like that if you wish. Save it to the end. It's spontaneity on a nonverbal level. Anyway, now we have the pleasure and the privilege of turning the speaking over to Rabbi Dario Figin, followed by Congregant Deb Rednick.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, yes.
Okay. I was saying that it's, first of all, good evening, and that it's a pleasure and also an honor to be with you today. I will share one idea from the Jewish tradition based on the premise that what we call Maaseh Bereshit, mainly the creation of the world, is a process that still continues. It's not something that happened once and ended, some event in history. And it's a process that it's something that it's not perfect. On the contrary, our world needs tikkun, that means reparation. Our world needs reparation. So in that sense, we can be partners of God in the recreation of an unfinished and imperfect world. So having said this, I want to share with you one of the 613 commandments of the Torah that it's called Bal Tashchit, literally, do not destroy. So the Torah says on the book of Deuteronomy, chapter 20, verse 19, regarding the laws of war, the following: when you lay siege a city for a long time, fighting against to capture it, do not destroy its trees. This is in the Bible. And the rabbis in the Talmud developed this commandment and said that not only we should not make harm to our planet, but also we need to take care and we need to protect it because it is our common home. We need to continue recreating our world. I'll give you just two examples of this law in rabbinical thought. The first is in the Babylonian Talmud, in the Tractate of Shabbat, page 67b. We read there that one who covers an oil lamp, causing the flame burn inefficiently and allowing the fuel to evaporate faster, violates the prohibition of Bal Tashchit. And the second example is in the Shulchan Aruch, one of the most important law codex. There it is written that one who uses too much wood to make a coffin for a person who dies also violates this law. So the casket should be as simple as possible. Judaism is not based only on beliefs. Different Jews can have many completely and even contradictory thoughts. I think Judaism, the faith in Judaism is one of the legs, but not all. Judaism is mostly a way of life based basically on actions and on how we behave. So having said that, let me say that every Jew is commanded by the Torah to respect and to take care of our world. This is, as my friend said, this is an ethical and also a religious deed. It's not just a belief, it's a commandment that we must try to translate into action. So thank you, and I want to pass the post to Deb Rudnick, who will share with you one example that we did in our congregation.
Thank you, Rabbi. Can you all hear me? Great. Well, Rabbi set me up perfectly with this example of not wasting fuel oil, because the example I have to share is on that exact subject. So our congregation's building was built with a boiler that ran on fuel oil, which is not an efficient way to heat a building. And so when we started looking and thinking to ourselves, what can we do at a congregational level? This was a clear low-hanging fruit for us. Our energy system wasn't efficient. And we knew we could save both greenhouse gas emissions as well as quite a bit of money in making this switch. And fortunately, we also knew that PSE had an energy advisor program. So we actually applied to them and received a custom grant that helped defray the cost of putting in a heat pump system, which is far more efficient than the fuel oil and the boiler we were using. And we expect that we should recoup the costs of this investment in making this switch within about 5 years, but the life of our system is probably 15 to 20 years. So we'll continue saving quite a bit of money and quite a lot of emissions over the full life of this brand new system. So we're really excited that we were able to make that change. It was relatively straightforward. And of course, every congregation and every building is going to have its own issues or priorities. But I would hazard a guess that we have many older buildings of faith on this island. And there's probably opportunities for you as well to look at where some low-hanging fruit might be for energy conservation. And I do encourage folks both at an individual and at a congregational level. You could check out psc.com/business. They have a 1-800 number for their energy advisors if you're interested in looking at that. And I'd be happy to chat with anyone who wants to talk to me about ideas as well. So thank you very much.
Excellent. Thanks very much. Now we've got the pleasure to move on to hear from Reverend Zachary Vinson. Zachary, sorry.
Thank you, John. I'm glad to be here tonight and to be with so many people of different faiths, and I imagine some folks of no faith at all, which is a place I feel very comfortable. As a Unitarian Universalist, I like to think of our faith tradition as a large tent tradition. We are a faith community that has our roots in Protestant Christianity, but have since grown beyond the Christian umbrella. And so in my church here, Cedars Unitarian Universalist Church, we have members of our community who are Jews, who are Christians, who are Buddhist practitioners, atheists, agnostics, people who follow earth-centered traditions, as well as many other paths. And so working across sort of the traditional faith lines is something I feel called to. For many people, when they hear all of those people coming together in one congregation, it's a little bit confusing. I think they're oftentimes asking, how does that work? And for us, we as a faith community organize ourselves around a covenant or an agreement on how we will be together and what we will do together. And it's complicated, it's messy, but for us, faith community is really about relationship. And in fact, back to the founding of Unitarianism in the 1560s in Transylvania, the gentleman credited with our founding, Francis David, says, we need not think alike to love alike. And I think that is a core belief that informs what I do as a minister. Now, within our congregation, we have our covenant, and with other congregations, we have a covenant, and from those covenants have formed an association. And we, as an association of congregations, have set out 7 principles that are things that we voted on together that guide the way that we will be together. And tonight, the 2 principles that I really think are important to this discussion on climate change are our first principle and our 7th principle. And those 2 principles, the first is that as Unitarian Universalists, we have agreed, we've covenanted together to affirm the inherent worth and dignity of every person. That everyone, no matter where you are, has worth and dignity. And the 7th principle is the affirmation of the interdependent web of life of which we are all a part. And so we have this belief that everyone matters and we are deeply connected. That what happens to one of us impacts the whole of creation, however you understand that sense of creation. And so with that, as we talk about issues of climate change, I think many of us, and Mike mentioned it earlier, that we recognize that the folks who are currently the most impacted by climate change are the folks who are at the margins and in precarious places in society. And what happens to those people impacts all of us. And also ignoring it will cause it to continue to grow and ripple out. And so for Unitarian Universalists, there's a moral calling, an ethical calling to respond to what is happening on our planet, to advocate for those communities being impacted, because eventually it will be at all of our doorsteps. So with that said, nationally there's a lot going on, but I want to talk vocally today about what my congregation here on Bainbridge in North Kitsap County is doing. And so I've been at Cedars about a year and a half. Most of it has been in this time of the pandemic, which is an interesting way to start your career. But one of the things that really drew me to this community when I was considering where to go, where to apply and be called, was that they're doing something a little bit unique. And some of you may know, and I see many members here, Cedars has made an intentional commitment to, for now, not owning our own building. We rent the Island School in pre-pandemic times, and we'll go back there post-pandemic times. But part of the reason that we rent rather than own our own building is we recognize that having a building sit all week can cause some, it costs energy. You have to heat things. You still have to attend to all the things that you would in a building. And so we've committed to, for the time being, renting, and as part of that, reducing our carbon footprint. Also in that, we participate in what is called the Green Sanctuary Program, which is a national initiative from the Unitarian Universalist Association that encourages congregations to think about their environmental impact and to start taking real steps towards reducing their carbon footprint. For us, that's looked like a lot of, recycling, composting. When we were meeting at the Island School in person, anything that we used that was single use, we made a commitment to it being compostable and to be sourced from places that had the least impact. It's also meant that we do own our office space. That's where I am now in Winslow. But we've also taken a lot of steps to make sure that the space we do own is as energy efficient as possible. And so through some great vision that was there before my time, Cedars has all of our lights, our low energy use, all of our heating system, to the point where for our office space, which is, it's not huge, but it's not small, we spend approximately $700 a year for our entire energy bill. That comes to about $60 a month, which when I first saw that in the budget line item, I thought it was a typo, because I think about my own house and how much I pay to heat my house and how much I pay, and was really just astounded by the commitment to energy efficiency. And and as Mike and John have said, that like the energy use is one of those big carbon generators, and so being committed to that. In addition, we have usually at least twice a year a service that talks and addresses environmental issues, whether that's issues with the Salish Sea. Last September, we had a service exploring our connection to the water, what it means to live on an inland sea and to have that connection the way we do. This also meant that we've taken on some service projects. I know we have many members who are involved in the community in different ways, but as a community, we started before COVID and hope to continue at some point something where we called the Climate Change Cafe, which adapted a cafe conversation model that some people are familiar with called the Death Cafe. that helps people talk about issues of death in a safe space. And so we took that model and had a pilot program to begin exploring issues of climate change and our emotions around that and our commitment around that as a community. Also this past year, one of the things when we made the transition, like many congregations, to virtual church, the church of YouTube in our case, one of the ways that we sold it was that, hey, this is going to reduce our carbon footprint in the way that we're not all driving on Sunday morning to be at the Island School. We're not all driving to meetings at the office. And out of that, we've started to recognize that when it is time to return, we need to explore ways of continuing to have some of these virtual options. So that way we're not having a dozen meetings a week where everyone has to drive to one place, but we can do like we're doing this evening, where we're all in our homes without starting our cars and are able to still meet and have meaningful connection and hopefully reduce our carbon footprint. And for me, really, I've heard several people bring this up, but the idea of who comes after us and what are we leaving behind for those folks. And I just want to close by sharing some lyrics from a hymn in our hymnal that I always am very inspired with. And these words are: circle round for freedom, circle round for peace, for all those imprisoned, circle for release, circle for the planet, circle for each soul, for the children of our children, keep the circle whole.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Okay. I'm reminding all of you, if you have any questions, it's time to post them as we go through on chat, and we'll try to get to them later. So now we have the honor of turning to Reverend Karen Haig. You're muted, Karen.
After so many months and months and months on Zoom, you'd think we'd stop doing that. I'm delighted to be with you all. John, thank you for this invitation. I will say that what each of you who has spoken before me has said has touched me deeply, and I resonate and share many of the things that you care about. So thank you all. Holy Scripture tells us that in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth and the creatures of the earth, and that God took great delight in all of them. Humankind was given dominion, the responsibility to steward all that God had made. So creation care is a primary tenet of the Christian tradition. But there is often confusion about the notion of dominion over creation. It is, however, clear that the Creator was placing the care of creation in our hands. I think part of the confusion about dominion has a great deal to do with what white Christians did when they came to the so-called New World. The world they came to, of course, was only new to them. And still, they set out to have dominion over both its people and its land. And the people at St. Barnabas are trying to recognize and understand how we have misused the notion of powering over, whether it be powering over people or powering over the natural world. So to me, to us, to our community, it feels important in any sort of conversation about creation care to acknowledge the first people who were here, the people whose land we set dominion over, and the people who have so very much to teach us about being in harmony with and caring for creation. And I saw earlier in the chat, I was delighted to see that the Suquamish tribe, whose land we our church sits on, is a partner in this work. So that was really happy news to see. That may seem off topic to you in a conversation about climate change, but I don't think so. God, as we know God, covenanted with God's people to care for creation. The land that surrounds us is part of who we are. It reflects our histories. We are to be stewards, caretakers of this wondrous creation. And that means we are responsible to live our lives in ways that will restore and protect the environment. Like the first peoples, we seek to ensure that what we do honors creation. I think one of the things that the pandemic has, or at least should have taught us, is that the boundaries and borders of continents or countries, or even red states and blue states, mean nothing when it comes to disease. They mean nothing when it comes to creation care. We're all in this together isn't a platitude. It is the heart of the Christian story. As Zachary said, whatever hurts one hurts us all. Whatever benefits one, particularly the most vulnerable, benefits us all. As Christians, we are called to serve the most vulnerable, many of whom are directly impacted by the food scarcity that's a direct result of climate change. As we've heard several people say, the people who have the least impact are most impacted. So the way we treat our environment has a profound impact on other people, which means the way we treat our environment is the way we treat other people. So for Christians who are called to love one another, not attending to climate change is not an option. What we do really matters because we are all so deeply connected. And while it's true, people in different parts of the world suffer differently from climate change, it's also true that climate change impacts all of us. So at St. Barnabas, a lot of work was done before I arrived there 3.5 years ago. A whole lot of work was done on the campus, the lighting and all kinds of things. We are a green congregation. We seek practical ways to care for creation. Just recently, our leadership decided to support a carbon offset program with the Episcopal Diocese of Southern Philippines. We have taken up the Genesis Covenant some time ago, which is a commitment to work to reduce greenhouse gases in the Episcopal Church writ large by a minimum of 50%. We've become acquainted with an organization called Drawdown Seattle, which is really an exciting, wonderful organization that talks in very positive ways about what we can do and how we can reverse climate change, which is very heartening. We're just installing rain barrels for irrigation. We've changed out all the light bulbs. We put lights on timers. Like some of you, anything that we have that's disposable is compostable. We have a year-round stewardship program that highlights creation care. And we are praying together for open hearts and for the courage to take action in ways that will actually make a difference. So those are some of the ways we've taken practical steps to reduce our impact on climate change. And I know that we will continue to find new ways of caring for God's beautiful and beloved creation. And I'm just thrilled to be in this with all of you. So thank you.
Thank you, Karen. Great job. Now we have the honor of turning to Bishop Tom Bell. Tom.
Thank you, John, for the invitation and the opportunity to participate. Councilperson Deet, thank you for your participation tonight and your leadership. Mike, thank you for the very motivational presentation. Although I have to admit, on the multiple bikes and skis, you got me on both parts. To the Lagerlofts, I got to think back to soccer games, and I think Lars is one of yours. Many years ago when our boys were out on the field together. And then to the I've been inspired by the words of the other faith leaders, and I've taken notes on some of the great concepts. This concept of creation care, I think, is a beautiful way to put that, but also some of the ideas that your congregations have taken. Again, my name is Tom Bell. I'm the current bishop of the Bainbridge Island Ward of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. My wife, Mary, and I have lived on the island for 30 years. We raised our children here, and we're now blessed to have 3 grandchildren living on the island. And our goal is to get as many of our kids back as we can. In my role as bishop, I am charged with the responsibility to preach and teach the gospel of Jesus Christ. As I prepared tonight, I reviewed, well, my comments are based on 31 scriptures. I promise I'm not going to read them all. In fact, I won't read any, but virtually every sentence is based on a scripture, either from the Bible, the Book of Mormon, the Doctrine and Covenants, or the Pearl of Great Price. We believe that the earth and all of its creations are creations of God, and that as the beneficiaries of this creation, we should care for the earth, be wise stewards over it, and preserve it for future generations. The earth and all the things on it are part of God's plan for the redemption of his children, and should be used responsibly to sustain the human family. All are stewards, not owners, over this earth, and we will be accountable for God for what we do with his creations. All of us should gratefully use what God has given, avoiding wasting life and resources, and using the bounty of the earth to care in particular for the poor and the needy. To truly reverence that creator, we must reverence his creations. I love that concept of creation care. God intends his creations to be pleasing to look upon and to enliven the mind and the spirit. It is important to see and appreciate the glory of God in all things, because the state of the human soul and the environment are interconnected. Each affects the other. The earth, all living things, and the expanse of the universe, all, we believe, eloquently witnesses of God. Scriptural accounts and portrayals of the creation show that God cares about all of the things that he has made, his children, the earth, and all living things on it. The earth and its creations are eternal. The earth is a place where God's children experience mortality, exercise agency, learn from their experiences, improve and progress. Most importantly, the earth is a place where the Savior took on a mortal body and completed his mission. The earth also teaches us. We can learn, for example, the laws, principles, and patterns by which it functions. I really liked that comment from the Lagerlofts about the combination of the two. We learn from the earth respect and humility when we work with it and not against it. It allows us to seek the works of God that are testimony of him. We believe that God has made us accountable for the care and preservation of the earth and in the wise use of its resources. As stewards, we avoid complacency, excessive consumption, using only what is necessary. We should make our homes and neighborhoods and cities responsibly beautiful. I love the CAP plans and how they are intended to do just that. We need to preserve the resources and protect them for future generations, for the spiritual and temporal blessings that come from the blessings of nature. The earth is endowed with an array of natural resources that will provide for the human family if they are used as the Lord instructed, to care for the poor and the needy, to not use more than is needed, to avoid waste, and to not forcibly take resources from one another. We believe that it pleases God that he has given the earth and the good things that come with it to bless us. They not only provide for our temporal needs, but they are also given to gladden the heart and enliven the soul. Now, the church, as a global church, strives to conserve and manage energy appropriately. It has implemented a green building initiative globally that incorporates new sustainable design and construction practices. Water conservation efforts currently include the use of smart controllers, hydrometers, rain sensors, drip irrigation, secondary reclaimed water. Farm and ranch lands, which the church has much of, are protected from overgrazing to nutrient depletion, and we use natural organic resources in those efforts. So, conclusion is that the earth and all things on it are creations of God. As beneficiaries of these divine creations, we should care for the earth, be wise stewards for it, and preserve it for future generations. The earth and all things on it are part of God's plan for the redemption of his children. While these principles are clear, as I prepared my remarks, it became clear that we need more focus on these issues in our own congregation. I, my family, and our congregation can do more to achieve these goals we now share with you, to be diligent, collaborative stewards for this part of the earth. And thank you for the opportunity to speak.
Wonderful job. I see hands, I see clapping. I do not see questions. However, since there are no questions, you're going to have to put up with one of mine. So my question to the faith leaders is, what factors do you see getting in the way of people feeling and acting on their duty to creation?
John, I would say there are lots and lots of things, and they're probably as particular to individuals as they are, as there are as many individuals as there are. But I think part of it is not knowing what to do. Especially, I think in light of the pandemic, there's been so much that we haven't expected, and it's been a time that's been difficult in all kinds of ways. It feels like, everything is new for the first time, and I think people want to help in many arenas, dismantling racism, one of them in particular, but we don't necessarily know what to do. So part of what's so exciting about this group coming together is being able to work together to put out information and give people particulars that that they can do. That's part of why I appreciate the Drawdown Seattle program so much, is that there's just all kinds of information out there about what we can do as individuals. And Marcy spoke beautifully to that as well. So that's one reason. It's certainly not the only reason, but I think that's one.
Thank you. Anyone else with some thoughts? Yeah, Tom.
Yeah, I second that. But I also, one of the interesting things that, in scripture, there are different principles of faith and action, etc. But when Christ taught, one of the things he frequently told people first was remember. And I think some of us, including me as I was preparing, we don't remember to tie the principles of faith and stewardship to what's happening every day. We have to have that, what do I do next, but with also that motivation of, well, remember what this is really truly all about. And so that notion of just remembering what the earth is really for, I love the idea of there's the boundaries and the jurisdictions really aren't the point when it comes to this. remembering what the earth is truly, truly for is a great motivation. We've got to figure out a way to capture that.
Excellent. Yes, Zachary.
Yeah, so in terms of the obstacles, things that maybe are in the way of some of these goals, this is something I've been reflecting on in my own life. And I think part of it, in my understanding, is getting beyond our own self-interest. And I think of the example about clothes. Here I have how many shirts do I have? I like my shirts. And I don't think about how my choices always are impacting the whole. And part of that is just, culturally, I think many of us are kind of, we're in a water of individualism. And to recognize that connected nature is radical and hard to live into. And so I see that as one of the challenges, is just seeing how we are connected to each other.
Wonderful. Anyone else with some thoughts? Well,
I'm seeing Patty Fielding raising her hand.
who, I'm sorry.
Patty Fielding.
Patty Fielding.
I don't, I'm not sure I can.
Can you hear me?
There you are.
Okay, I'm not sure why you see me. Maybe I'm on your last screen.
Sorry.
I'm Patty Fielding, and I live at the Grow community, and I'm also a member of Kol Shalom. And this may not be the appropriate place, but I figure that leaders of our faith communities are leaders in our community at large. And I walk my dog a lot all over downtown Bainbridge, and there's so much construction going up. And I just wonder what would happen, given that electricity is such a huge part of our energy problem. What would happen if more pressure were put to bear, or whether it's even legally possible, to require new construction to at least wire the homes for solar panels? When they built the Grow community, that's exactly what happened. We have full solar panels, but many people couldn't afford it or didn't choose, but the wiring is there, and that's such a huge part of a solar installation. Maybe Joe can speak to that. And I'm just wondering, since electricity is a big part of it and home consumption is a big part of it, what this group could do to really, ask the question.
Might be a Mike question or a Joe question.
Well, thank you, Patty. I'll take a stab and Mike can follow up. In addition to being a council member, I'm a solar guy by chance.
Yeah.
So, well, first off, it's actually pretty easy to pre-wire for solar. I mean, it's not very expensive. So for new construction. But the second is, it's very important. We're not like Hawaii, where you can put solar panels any which way. Here we have to be, siting is critical. So it would be go against some of the wasteful tenets that I heard tonight to put solar panels, say, on the north side of a building here. Not good. Okay. So siting is everything. And we are working on, we have a green building task force at the city that we're looking at how to up our game on the building codes. Unfortunately, we're running against some legal issues where the city of Bainbridge Island cannot have a more stringent energy code than the state energy code, unfortunately. So the alternative then is we can't mandate it, but we can incentivize it. So maybe that's a little bit more detail than you need, but
that's fine.
That's enough for me.
Thank you.
Okay. Let's see. Not having any other questions, I'll just kind of swing into unless
John, I have a
Yeah,
question. Can
Okay.
I ask a question?
Yep.
So I'm curious, what's the best way in your congregations to reach people about this? Is it through a newsletter? Is it through your sermon? We always struggle with this, right? How to get to people. And so I think Karen said, to make it what they can do. What are your ideas? How do we do that in your specific congregation? And then maybe we can generalize it out into the whole.
Every way possible. People hear in different ways, people see in different ways, people learn in different ways. So whatever, we've recently found that having people who own email lists, like the heads of different committees and stuff, generating, congregation-wide energy through those people has gotten a lot of response. But I think it's important not to insist. I think it's important to help people understand and just to put things out there and then to lift them up and have all the congregational leaders doing that, not just whoever the pastor or the bishop or the rector or whomever is.
Wonderful. Anyone else want to weigh in on that? Yeah, Tom.
Just examples of the two things I was motivated to do in preparing. I found a good essay put out by our church on the topic. I'm going to do a two-step. I'm going to share that with our congregation via email. And then we also have a Friends of Bainbridge Island Ward, which is not an official church thing, but has members of our congregation and friends of people or people who used to be here. I want to share what I learned tonight with people, but I also want to give them access to the other resources you've talked about so that they can start to interact with other people on this, not just people in our congregation, because you guys are ahead of us.
Excellent. Anyone else with thoughts? Stephen.
I would just underscore what Marcy and Gary were talking about, where the household carbon footprint is one factor to consider, and then the church property is another. So there are congregations in Seattle where they've done the carbon calculation process for the church itself and its property, and they'd worked on getting solar panels, but then they would also simultaneously engage individuals and families and couples to look at their own footprints as an added dimension to it, so that if you are a member of our faith community, you're addressing both issues. What kind of footprint do we have as a faith community, and what's my individual footprint, and how can I work both ends of the problem that way?
Great. Well, let's see. I don't see any other comment questions. Be sure to include the children. Yes, okay. Stephen, did you have something else?
I just wanted to underscore what Heidi said there, that some of our younger members are profound prophets and witnesses on this issue, and are often in the lead on some of the initiatives.
Okay. Great. Well, I'll speak for a few minutes, and then if we have more time, we can chat. I'd first like you to note that we put the pledge in the chat. And the idea of a pledge is a sort of a faith-based idea, is that making a pledge to do something distinguishes people in faith communities and in the rest of the communities. The normal way to pledge is to pledge money, but here we're pledging attention, we're pledging action, we're pledging reflection. Not a big step, but it's a really important step. It's a bit like the carbon footprint. The pledge lingers. It's something that's made. And so different congregations are free to retrofit this thing. We may end up posting it. Imagine, for example, that if we get a fair number of people taking the pledge, that we might move on to have businesses take the pledge. And if businesses take the pledge, you would have the businesses recognized by having a sticker in their window. And then you'd say, oh, you took the pledge. I'm going to shop with you. This is a bunch of things that we can do that would make a whole lot of difference. First, could everyone who's a parent or grandparent raise their hands? Okay. So at base, creation care is something you know in your bones. It's a wisdom we all carry deeply. And as we age and head towards grandparentdom, we feel it more deeply. So what climate change is, in addition to being difficult and daunting, is it's also an incredible opportunity to rethink our own existence, how we are in the world, how we care in the world, and how we interact in the world. Science can only get us so far. But here science and faith are on the same side. But it's now turning to us. And we have an opportunity to just take what is common and make it uncommon. For example, just the name grandparent just refers to a relation. But what each of us are being asked to do is to truly be a grandparent, to take responsibility for all of parenting, whether it's of existence, of each other, of neighbors, of communities. We seek to be a grandparent. We have so many pejoratives in this time about losing something, of giving it up. But what if we rethought giving up? And that giving is literally giving to the up. That we're giving up to something higher, our own existence, our own future, the possibility of life that is having some degree of comfort for our grandchildren and later. We're the first generation to truly understand the problem. We're the last generation that can prevent it. This makes us here in this Zoom the most important generation in the history of humanity. You are elevated. We are together because we're the only ones who can stop it. We can stop it, and we don't have the complete responsibility of stopping everything, but we have the responsibility to reach out to our friends, to find all the different ways that we can raise the issue of climate in a way that's comfortable. Cocktail parties, whether you're out and socializing, all the different ways to talk about taking the carbon footprint or other things and putting it out there. If we don't act now, a slow holocaust awaits our grandkids. But we're also acting in a fashion that our ancestors have acted before. If I have any study of history, all of the major transitions in the US were a marriage of faith and science and reason. Our Declaration of Independence, our Constitution, our abolition movement, our civil rights movement, and on and on. At each point, law wasn't enough. Science wasn't enough. And only with faith and community, with people marching and doing things, were we able to move forward in the way we needed to go. The good news is we don't have to solve the world's problem. We only have to solve the world's problem here. COVID was a warm-up. We now see, and we're gifted in seeing the unpreparedness and the inequity of our systems. One of our biggest challenges now has been mentioned of how to reduce our household consumption. And the carbon footprint is a step, a deep step. But we can also find other ways to sort of envision this. Some say that reducing our footprint is more important than voting. After all, voting is for a future candidate. Acting on your footprint is voting to have a future. There's ways we can get this across. If everybody on this call got 20 household members to consider doing the footprint just among your friends, we would have well over 2,000 footprints. That would make us having possibly the best response rate in the nation. We could inspire thousands. So I admit to being embarrassed by my carbon footprint, as I calculated that my carbon usage is equivalent to about 1,100 citizens of Bangladesh. That's humiliating, and I've got a long way to go. But allied with this is an opportunity to fundamentally understand ourselves in a different way, to transform. On this island, we have both a brain trust and a heart trust. Within my experience, part of the problem is we're asking people to be abnormal. We're asking them to change normality. on a fundamental basis. But right now, normality is malignant. We have a civilization that's extinguishing itself. So it literally fails to be a civilization. But the opportunity we all share, each in our own ways, is to create, to find, to relabel, to monitor, to implement a new sense of civilization. There is deep comfort in discomfort if it's shared together. So I'd like to suggest that what we cannot face together could tear us apart. In the end, this is about a faith we all share, a faith in each other. And going back to Zachary, we need not think alike to love alike. In fact, I hope we do not think alike. But we have this wonderful opportunity where our capacity to love is probably the key ingredient to get us to where we need to go. So, should you want to take the carbon footprint, I noted my, oops, I didn't, I failed. I'm very sorry. I just tossed my email up there. So I'm willing to be your steward. I'm your go-to. I'm your errand boy. I'll do whatever it takes. If you want to get the carbon footprint test, I'll get it to you. If you want to take the pledge, I'll get it to you. But most importantly, I'm really interested in your ideas, because we are an us. There are no I's anymore. This climate change is about the hidden we. I am not complete without you. For example, we could decide to have another meeting 30 days or 60 days hence. We could decide to invite all the galvanized people in each congregation and have a larger meeting and have more ideas and have an opportunity to talk, because we are all legislators of ourselves. We are all legislators of our hearts. And thus we all have the capacity to make a significant difference for all those that will follow us. So thank you very much for your time, your attention, and most importantly, your wisdom and devotion. I guess that's it, unless anyone else wants to add something. Yep, I see some hands. Stephen.
Oh, it's there. Someone, all right, Michael already put the link in for Taming Bigfoot.
Ah, good.
Good job.
I didn't mean to hog the last say, I just was following up. But I want to thank everyone for attending. It's very kind, and your care makes all the difference. So with that, if you don't mind, I'll sign off. Could everyone give a big wave to all the presenters for all their hard work? They put in a lot of time. Take care and hope to meet you soon. Bye.
Thank you, John.
Thank you, Marcy.